Before we begin, I'm going to ask everyone to please turn off all electronic devices to have the property, dignity, and decorum during the service. It'll be Berkowitz, as she deserved. We're gathered here today to pay our respects to her beloved mother, Bubby, great-grandmother, sister, aunt, one of the last members of a generation, Malka Bas Nasan Mali or Malkshi Roth. Before I start, I'm going to ask her grandson Eli to come up and say a parak of Tillim, a chapter of Psalms.
Ish es chayil miyim tzaverachoig mipni michra, batach bole bala v'shalom layachzor. Gwalasu toy v'loiro kol yimei chayecha, dosher tzemel v'fishtim v'tas v'chepes kapel. Haisa kanyo seicher mimecha tovi lachma, v'takam beo laila v'titain teren levesa v'chok l'narasel. Zomo soto v'tikocheu mipri kapar neta karem. Chogo miyos nasel v'tamed zerosel. Ta'ama ki toiv sacha v'lo yichbe v'laira nera. Yodeha shilcha ba'kisha v'kapeh tamchu folech. Karpa pasa liani v'yodeha shilcha liavon. Lo sira livesa mishale kiko vesa lavushanim. Marvadim asasala sheish v'agaman lavusha. Noda basharim baal v'shifta im ziknei aretz. Sadim asava timka v'chagan nasan aknani. Aiz v'hada lavusha v'tisak liom acharon. Piach piha pascha b'chachma v'saras chesed al lashana. Tzafia alichos beisa v'lechem atzus lo sochel. Kamu v'anova ashua balo v'ala. Rabos bonos achayo v'atolis al kulona. Sheker hachin v'hevel ayofi isha yiras Adonai hi tisalel. Tinu la mepri yodeha v'yalu b'shari ma'aseh.
Eli just read the beautiful Eishes Chayil, the song we sing each Friday night, the song to a woman of valor. And indeed, Mali Roth was such a woman. As I mentioned a moment ago, the last few months have been extremely painful and bittersweet for the Green Road Synagogue, as so many of our longtime members who really built the shul, with their blood, sweat, and tears, have passed on. I look at the walls and the names and the plaques, and sadly, fewer and fewer of them have remained. And Mali had a very strong relationship with the shul and a very close relationship with Rabbi Granitstein. And last night, right after Sally and I spoke about her mother's passing, I sent an email to Rabbi Granitstein letting he and Malka, because both of them were incredibly close to the family. And I want to share with you the letter that he sent in return to Sally that I'm going to read. Dear Sally, we were deeply saddened to learn about your beloved mother's passing. This past August, during our brief visit to Cleveland, Malki was so glad she had the opportunity to visit with her, and she reminisced about the shul she loved. From the very beginning of my position as rabbi of our shul, your mother's involved presence was clear. It was not only as sisterhood president, but even in unofficial capacities, her commitment and loyalty to the shul was palpable. I will never forget her multiple kindnesses and solid support to us both. There never was an Erev Rosh Hashanah that she did not call us to wish us a good Geben Shtiyar. There are any number of people who in no official capacity at all represented everything that the shul was about. She was one of the multitude of Holocaust survivors that so decisively defined our shul. She survived the Shoah, and together with your father, Sam Zechron Levracha, built a strong family and led a remarkable, productive life. Sally, please take comfort in the fact that you and your family did everything possibly to allow your aging mother to live with kavod and dignity. She lived in your home and was constantly surrounded with love and nachas from your children and grandchildren. It was a wonderful sight to see her, always beautifully dressed, smiling, graciously enjoying conversation on the couch in your family room. We sorely regret that we cannot attend her levaya today. However, our thoughts and prayers are with you. She was a true Eshet Chayil. May her memory be a blessing, Rabbi Granitstein. I think he perfectly captured who she was what she meant to the shul, what she meant to her family, what she meant to the community. We're trying to be a delicate balance of being Berkowitz, of paying proper respect and honor, but being timely so that she can be buried within the proper time frame. So I'm going to call immediately upon the members of her family to say a few words. First, to call upon her son-in-law, Arnold Arnie Levy.
From the first day, almost, that I met my mother-in-law, she said to me, we don't have in-law children, we only have children. And it was true that from that day on, she treated me as a son. And it was indeed a pleasure, a privilege, and an honor to have her live with us for the last 5.5 years. And in the beginning, she didn't want to come to live with us when it became obvious she could not be alone. And I insisted, I said, you belong with us as we belong with you. She said, well, what's going to happen if you can't take care of me? I said, I'll let you know. In today's society, today's cynical world, what we call shikra, alma de shikra, it's a false world, it's not real. Fame and fortune is usually what is noted, but the famous are rarely great and the great are rarely famous. I'm not insinuating that my dear mother-in-law, our mother, was somebody great, but certainly the life that she lived, I think, pays great witness to the fact that there was some greatness, certainly to us, her children. As Rabbi Lauer mentioned, she is one of the last of the survivors. A survivor of Auschwitz, tattoo number A1059. I remember once I wanted to take a picture of her tattoo years ago. She didn't want me to. She said, what for? Doesn't mean anything. I said, well, it's something we want to remember. She said, you don't need to remember. It doesn't mean anything. And I never took that picture. But the fact of the matter is she was not a survivor, but rather a champion, a victor. She was able to live a life, as Rabbi Granestein worded, productive, constructive, reclaimed her place as a Jewish woman, despite the fact that our enemies wanted to destroy us. She was really lost over the past 12 years that her husband, her partner, Reb Simcha, was gone. And she was really lost without him. She was the woman behind the man, although he thought that he was the boss. And once we went to celebrate Reb Simcha's birthday, I think it was his 80th birthday, and she said to us, you better pray that I go first, because I pity you if you have to take care of your father. So it was. She was not an educated woman, but one of emunah pshuta, simple faith. And I'd like to share with you one story that I experienced. Every year at the time we change our clocks, this time of the year when we go from daylight saving back to regular time, I would go to her apartment for the years she was in her apartment, and change the Shabbos clock back to the non-daylight saving time. So I showed up one Friday afternoon the first Shabbos after the change of the clocks, to adjust the clock. She happened to have a visitor, one of her friends, also a survivor, although one that did not survive the horrors that she did, thankfully, but nevertheless somebody who had gone through it. And they were in the den, room that they use as a den, and they were talking. And I was playing with her clocks, and I overheard the conversation. And a friend said to her, and she says to her friends, "No, I have to greiten for Shabbos. I have to get ready for Shabbos. I have to put the food up," whatever it was. And a friend said to her, Malchi, you don't have to worry about Shabbos so much. For what you went through, you're parted from Shabbos. You don't have to worry about the details. And she responded, Efshayo, perhaps yes, aber Azoy, the Eltern Geteen, that's what our parents did, and this is what Instin, and that's what we do. That, I think, encapsulates what she was. Emunah Pshuta. She did what she did. She didn't understand everything she did. But she did it because that's the way she was raised, that's the way she lived, and it was the way that she lived her whole life. She had the zchus to be in this world for almost 95 years. And I want to say a few words and really direct them more to her grandchildren, great-grandchildren she had the zchus to see, to be with, that she, as all our forebears are, and we are not just our biological offspring of those people, she's never really gone. She is part of you, because if she had not lived, you would not be here. When we say the words, Tiyeh nishmas, nishmaso b'tzura b'tzura achayim, I should be bound up in the bond of life, it's a lashon kfula, double lashon. 2 times do we say bound up, tied up in the knot of life. Tied up from those that came before, and tied up to those who will come after. May they be multitudes, ken yirbu. There is a custom, I happened to read this just recently, a custom that we're aware of, but I did not know the real reason. There was a custom when a person leaves the cemetery, that we tear a little bit of grass and we throw it over our shoulder. And there's various Ramazim reasons, allusions to why we do this. Grass in the wind, that's life eventually is just grass in the wind. But we also say a pasuk. It's a custom to say a pasuk. Yatzitzu me'ir ke'esev ha'aretz, that they will sprout forth like the grass from the ground. It may be that her descendants live their lives according to the way she would want them to, as her forebears did before her, as she did, until a time when the tears will be wiped from our face, and death will be eliminated forever.
I'd like to call up her daughter, Sally.
Firstly, I want to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for giving me the good fortune to have Malka Bas Nusin Vizisel Malchi as my mother. As I look out and see the faces of family and friends, I'm filled with emotion and know that many of you share our grief. I'd like to tell you about my mom. She grew up in Sapinka, a small town in Romania, which was in between the more well-known cities of Sighet and Satmar. She spoke of her life there lovingly. She was the third of 7 siblings and liked to remind us often that she was loved by her parents, despite the fact that she was the third girl. Her mother, Zisel, was a real balabusta, and her father, Nusin, was a man who lived by the letter of the law. He would not allow her to ride a bike because it was not modest, but she repeatedly told me that although he did not dance with his wife, he used to dance with his girls all the time. She could remember all the way back to 1929 when her first cousins, Sruli and Benjamin Taub, were born, because she was in the room. She was so close to her grandparents, and when no one could find her, they always knew she was at their house. And when her aunt went into labor there, she was asked to be in the room to hold her hand at the age of 6. That aunt did not survive childbirth. My mom would tell you she remembers the scene like it was yesterday. She learned from the Tsenorena and came home to freshly made latkes, or cheese knishes, which her mother made effortlessly. She played with the Rav's daughter, Cyrilla, who was her best friend, peeking through the slats in the room where the Melamed would teach the boys, which included her second cousin, my dad, until he was sent to yeshiva at age 11. She often described a highlight of her childhood. When the Sapinka Rebbe came down the street, people would hang out of their windows and stand on the balconies to see him coming. She recalled that even the non-Jewish neighbors did so because they knew that he was someone great. She could close her eyes and vividly describe the matzahs hanging from clips on a line in the attic so the animals wouldn't get at them. She described how everyone would take their pot of Shabbos cholent to the large coal stove at Shlomitzik Froimovitz's grandmother's house down the street. She went to school until grade 8, at which point she went to work in a factory shelling walnuts. She said that one day the supervisor had her stand on the table and made an announcement to the whole group that she was the best and fastest worker. He gave her a little hat and scarf, and she remembered being very proud of that accomplishment. When she was 19, her own mother fell ill. Upon the realization that she was dying, her mother told her to run and get her siddur, her prayer book. She had always left it in the shul, which was in the Rav's house, and she told her to keep it, and my mom did so. Her non-Jewish friend hid it for her during the war, and luckily I have that siddur today. Eventually, her mother's severe appendicitis led to her death. Her oldest sister, Henya Rivka, was already married and living away from home. And the next oldest sister, our Tante Reisi, Rose Pollock of blessed memory, had been living away with my aunt. So my mom was left to run the home and did so with the utmost expertise. She took care of her younger sister and 3 brothers, her father, and ultimately her grandmother, who came to live with them. How ironic, all these years later, that her own granddaughter was presented with the same mitzvah. She and her brother, Moshe Shmuel, my uncle Sidney Simon, took care of their younger sisters, Susie, Sophie Deutsch. They should both live and be well. And their 2 younger brothers, Beryl and Anshel, of blessed memory, until they were taken to the ghetto in Taich and then to Auschwitz in 1944, where upon arrival, the infamous Dr. Mengele decided that her father, her older sister, 2 little brothers, and grandmother would all be sent to the crematorium. My mom never uttered a word about the concentration camp to us. In fact, I didn't hear a lot about the details of her own personal story until, as an adult, I went back to the old country a few years ago with my cousin Susie. I had learned a lot about it from Tante Sassi, who remembers every detail and who felt very strongly that we should know. And then my mom decided she should talk a little bit about it. She would talk about the hard wooden bunks they slept on and about the mean woman who would slap them if they asked for more food. And I learned that she made grenades in the Altenburg work camp. But in general, the word Auschwitz was not evoked in my house as I was growing up. On rare occasions, my parents would make reference to the events that led them to leave Romania. They would label it the Milchuma, the war. They spoke nostalgically of life before the war, but they never spoke of what happened during the war. They spoke reverently of their parents or siblings or the famous Rebbeim who were lost, but they never spoke of how they perished. My mom wanted to protect us, so she didn't speak of it, but she did dream about it. If you have lived through such a horror, it never leaves you. The nightmares of Auschwitz were always at the back of her mind, despite the efforts to push them away. To quote my daughter Dasi, who wrote a paper on my mother in grad school, She learned from a very young age that you cannot control the world around you. God has a plan, and even if it makes you angry or you do not understand why things happen, they still must be happening for a reason. Bobby never questioned her faith or choices as she went through her life. She accepted her lot, held her head high, and made best of the situation. Even in the concentration camps, she did what she needed to do to survive. This is a testament to her strength and ability to always persevere. For my brother Nathan of blessed memory, my brother Benny and I, it was normal to grow up among an enclave of survivors. Few of us had grandparents, and practically every adult we knew had a number on their arm. My mother's number was 10059. Tante Risey was first in line, Tante Saucy was in the middle, and then my mom. She was never embarrassed by the number. She didn't try to cover it up. It seemed to be matter of fact, a part of life. My mom and others who went through the Holocaust are cut from a different cloth, and we cannot begin to fathom their incredible strength, emunah, humility, and even holiness. And although my mom found it painful to tell her stories, she would no doubt tell you now to never stop the pursuit of making the Holocaust relevant to the youth of today. She would say that we all have an important task of keeping those years alive and impacting, and we should be relentless in doing so. After the war, she returned to Sapinka with a shorn head, wearing men's army boots, given to her by one of her liberators. My dad waited for her at the train station and said when she came off that train, she was the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. They married a few months later and tried to make a living by having a little grocery store out of my Uncle Al Simon's house, where they lived with several other family members. It wasn't enough for them, so they left Sapinka soon after for Satmar, where my brother Nathan was born. And then my dad began the process of getting papers to leave by crossing borders back and forth illegally at night, stories that you have no doubt heard before, undertaken by many of the brave survivors. Eventually, they journeyed to Prague and settled in a building with other family members. My mom said it was scary and nice at the same time, until Nathan got croup at the age of 18 months. Her devotion to him knew no bounds as she physically crawled into the large crib in the hospital and slept with him in the crib. Little did she know then that 44 years later, she would be nursing his health closely once again. After Prague, it was on to Paris for a year, and eventually America, arriving on the boat at Ellis Island. She did not see my father the whole time during the boat trip. The men were downstairs, and apparently my dad was sick to his stomach the entire journey. She said she could visit him occasionally and bring him pieces of bread. She and my brother were on the top level, and when they finally arrived at the New York harbor, she was met there by Tante Saucy. She had lied about the place of Nathan's birth so it would match what it said on her papers, and she feared that they would send her back. But the intake officer said, "Mrs. Roth, you are in America. You can do and say whatever you want, and no one will harm you here." The Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society wanted to send them to St. Louis to be farmers, but no, she wanted to settle in Cleveland because she knew she already had relatives here. They built a good life together, and it became one of contentment very quickly. My mom got her driver's license soon after arriving, and she got a job at the Bobby Brooks sweater factory. But Nathan cried all day when she was gone, so she finally gave it up. My brother Benny was born, and then me, and life was good. She enjoyed mahjong nights with her girlfriends, took us to Lake Plata and Euclid Beach Park, became involved in Hadassah, and raised us in a Heimische home, a traditional Jewish home, with a lot of love, a lot of nourishment, and a lot of simchas hachayim, a joy for life. To my parents, the shul, the Marmarischer Jewish Center, now the Green Road Synagogue, was their life, and they dedicated themselves to it. When the land was purchased for the shul in Beechwood, they built a house there and moved from South Euclid immediately. She washed the extra talesim by hand and made gefilte fish from scratch in the little kitchen for everyone's Shabbos Kiddush when we were still davening in the little shtibel before the present building was built. She was president of the sisterhood for many years, working at the picnics at Rose Farm. She loved Rabbi and Malka Granitstein. They both called her every Erev Yontif until this day, and she considered them both to be personal friends. And she appreciated their contributions to the shul and to this community, but especially for their appreciation of where they came from, what the survivors went through, and Rabbi Granitstein's never-ending focus to keep the memories and experiences of the Marmashers alive. She and my dad bought an apartment in Florida, and they would go there every winter with their extended family, who were also their friends, only enjoying it with the anticipation that her children and grandchildren could come down to visit. It was easy to please her. If we would be traveling anywhere in the world or drive anywhere out of state, the first person we would call when we arrived was Mom. In fact, I must admit, if the plane was due to land at noon, I lied, and I would tell her 1 p.m. so that if I was delayed, she wouldn't feel the anxiety of not knowing where I was. This was for her peace of mind, and these are the kinds of things that made her happy. This anxiety of not knowing where I was lasted until the day she died. She was the perfect homemaker. Everything in her home was pristine, every tablecloth neatly folded. She even ironed my dad's undershirts. She would make a family simcha, a bris for a grandchild, or an ufruf luncheon for one of my cousins, in her basement, preparing everything homemade for 80 people at the drop of a hat. Like her sisters, she was a balabusta par excellence. She was the best at making mile-high sponge cakes, kakosh and blintzes and other Heimische delicacies, and it pained her to give it up when in recent years her eyes and her hands were no longer enabled to do so. It gave her great pleasure to know that many of her granddaughters inherited those skills, and she was equally appalled that it skipped a generation in me. But the food is not all that she was about. There were many things that were important to my mom, such as freedom. She never took it for granted that she lived in a country where you could be free to practice your religion without oppression, and Thanksgiving was as big a holiday as any other. She was so happy to be an American, although ironically, she was so very European. She was annoyed at anyone who did not exercise their right to vote. And of course, she thought you could only be a Democrat to believe in democracy. And in her younger years, she followed political campaigns religiously and knew the candidates and the issues better than anyone. She loved Israel and would travel there often to see my dad's family. She would follow all the news about the strife there, and she would constantly worry about it. When we attended my cousin's wedding there just 8 weeks before the Six-Day War in 1967, she protested when the Americans were encouraged to go home. Her plan was to stay and bring barrels of water to the soldiers on the field so that they could wash themselves. She collected money in her blue pushka and bought trees from J&F for every occasion because she was sure she was doing her part to support the state of Israel in that way. She was a trophy-winning bowler, and because my brother was a baseball player, she soon became a fan of Major League Baseball, although she would not allow him to pursue it professionally because it was not a good job for a nice Jewish boy. She knew the lineup of the Indians' teams for years and would follow their progress, saying that the day Rocky Colavito was traded to Detroit in 1950-something was one of the saddest days of her life. She loved Jackie Kennedy and Princess Diana, and although she seriously dedicated her life to the concept of serving your man, she believed in the empowerment of women. For her, that meant being in charge of everything in the home and being excellent at it. But she also encouraged me to be educated and to take seriously working outside the home and succeeding in the bigger world. It was so ingrained in me that I have tried to impart that same mindset to my children. After 10 months of helping to take care of my brother and watching him succumb to his biggest adversary, my mom changed. It was just too hard to accept. She said that losing a child was worse than Auschwitz. She gave up many of the things she loved and became more introverted. She concentrated not on the social aspects of life, but rather continued to devote her energies on making my dad happy. She would never think of leaving his dinner in the oven and going out with her girlfriends, or sending him off to work without a lunchbox. Those would be great transgressions. He came home to what would now be considered a very fancy Shabbos meal. It was made effortlessly every single day. And as much as he was an outgoing, life of the party kind of man, she was really the opposite. Quiet, humble, full of grace and propriety. Together with my dad, they moved out of their home in Beechwood to an apartment, and after he was gone, she remained there, spending time visiting with the many friends in her building until physical issues prevented her from living there on her own. It was then that she moved in with our family. She became the center of things. She had a particularly close relationship with Dossie's kids because she saw them often, and if a day or two would go by, she would miss them and ask where they were. Ricky would dance for her and play Rummy Cube. Dahlia would draw her pictures and show her gymnastics, and Nava would sing and tuck her into bed after reading storybooks to her and showing her the pictures. Mom would pretend to go to sleep right away so that Nava would go home. All of these things made my mom happy. Of course, family was the most important thing to her. Her 11 grandchildren, particularly, were her pride and joy. And even though we knew that Todd was her favorite, she made no secret of it. She loved all of them and continued to be an integral part of their lives. Janie, Dana, Philip, Todd, Anna, Brittany, Chelsea. She appreciated your visits and your phone calls and always was so happy to hear about your latest accomplishments. She was interested in everything that each one of you were doing, as long as it involved a good education, making a living, and marrying someone from a nice Jewish home. She loved her 22 great-grandchildren, 22. Each new baby that came was the most beautiful baby in the world. She showered all of them with love and presence, and when they would leave, she would get emotional, always thinking that she would not live to see them the next time. I hope all of you will remember the Bubby of your youth, when she was healthy and energetic and productive and kind and caring. Tell your children about her and keep those memories dear to your heart. She was close to all of her cousins, her nieces and nephews, and especially to her girlfriends. And she suffered terribly when her best friend, Rose Foyer, died suddenly. She truly liked and got along with all of her machatunim, and she loved all of her in-law children and grandchildren. Arnie, Linda and Carl, Linda, Louis, Jeff, Shia, Susie, Josh, Shalom, and Shalamis and Melissa, both of whom she called Michelle. Her living within the intimate family environment gave us true insight into the person she was. She had a firm attitude about life and death. She accepted the fact that she was old, to have lived a long life to see the growth of her family. And before she lost her memory, she embraced her current status and didn't even despair at the prospect at being at the end of life's journey. She said she did everything she had wanted to do in her life. This gave her a sense of integrity and a strong sense of personal identity and a sense of peace. Caring for her these last few years was not a burden, it was a privilege. As she lost her independence, the changes were definitely more challenging for her than for me. It was also sad, as the awful enemy named dementia took hold and she could no longer remember where she lived. She would look at me and ask where Sally was. My mom was an amazing role model, and my childhood memories consist of ones marked by constant devotion. Everything was for Nathan, Benny, and I. Some people think that because your parent is of an advanced age, you are prepared to live without them. But I can tell you it is not so. No matter how old, losing a parent leaves a big hole in your heart. Your mother always has your back, and while I am content that she suffers no longer, I truly feel bereft. I allow myself to use this forum to share with you a lesson that I have learned from this journey, that you should never underestimate the power of a phone call, or a short visit to an elderly person who is homebound. It revives their spirit and is an added comfort and release for those of us who take care of them. If you have a half an hour to spare, spend it with an older person who is stuck in the house. I want to take this opportunity to thank some people who have played an important role in Mom's life, particularly in recent years. Firstly, to my aunt, Tante Sassi, whose level of devotion both to Mom and to myself showed my girls what it means to be a caring sister and a caring aunt. And even though Tante Reisi is no longer with us, she too is a loving sister and aunt always. The three of them were very close and have treated each other's children as their own. To Linda, who was never a daughter-in-law, but a daughter. Mom always listened to her and agreed with what Linda said, even after just saying no to me on the same subject. Linda treated Mom with respect and love and was devoted to her until the end. She not only helped her directly, but she and Carl helped me make important decisions about her care, and for this I will always be grateful. But Dr. Klarfeld, who watched over her health with a personal concern, there are just no words to appreciate your responsiveness and guidance and friendship. You cared as much as if she were your own mother. To Bika Cholim, who provided so much support during hospital stays, not only to the patient, but to the family, your special work is invaluable. May Hashem grant you the good health to continue to help others for many years to come. My thanks to the many qualified professionals at the Jewish Family Service Association, too many to mention, those who made things happen in a timely manner. And through them, we were fortunate to have Molly's angels, her aides, Shirley and Unique and Grace, who became part of the family. You brought her through many difficult physical and emotional challenges, and you taught me patience and understanding. The services that these two organizations provide for the sick and the elderly and their families should be applauded and supported. The good work is vital and has been much appreciated by our family and are notably of extreme importance to this community. Thanks to my girlfriends who visited on Shabbos afternoons and on weekday mornings when I was at work. You know who you are, smiling and giving her a hug and bringing her treats. Mom felt, as she would say, like a person and appreciated being remembered and included. Thank you to my son-in-law, Shaya, who made it a point to bring her a bit of flavor of her past. He would often get her into a good mood just by showing her pictures of the Hasidic Rebbes or talking her in Yiddish about life in the Altaheim. He was like a lifeline for her and for me. He would come whenever I called him, and when she began to lose her memory, he would be able to bring her back or calm her down. When Shalom became a part of the family, he would approach her with a big, "Hi, Bubs," every time, and she would stop and think about who he might be, and then acknowledge that he was the good-looking Chusin. She often commented that he was the right zivug for Shena. And of course, it was quite a shock for her to find out that he did not speak Yiddish, but she learned to like him despite this disturbing flaw. Ellie and Shalamis especially made every effort to come see her from Chicago. She loved to FaceTime with you, and she would say, "Oi, they have beautiful children, Kanai. And they would say, "We love you, Bubs." She'd smile back and say, "I love you too." And then she would whisper to me out of the side, "How could they see me and hear me from inside that little box?" To my daughters, Dasi and Shayna, who visited her almost every day and checked on her during the day, looking out for her, making sure she had what she needed. They attended to her needs when others could not, sending her little packages of her favorite foods. They laughed with Bubby, talked with Bubby, stayed with her, and stepped in many times when I needed an extra pair of hands. They loved Bubby so much, and even though sometimes she thought you were the same person, she loved you both. My thanks to my daughter, Eliza, who has put her own life aside, who took much of the everyday tasks of the household upon herself when in recent years caring for Mom became a bit more demanding of my time and energy. Mom got such pleasure when Eliza showed a desire to learn all of her special recipes. She made sure no obstacle was in Mom's way. She knew how to talk to Mom, and she would hold her hand and listen to her. Eliza, countless times, took the responsibilities away from me so that I would have a bit of manucha, a bit of rest. She would think of even the littlest things that would ultimately turn out to be a very big help. We were a team, and I could not have cared for Mom without her. She worried about her as much as I did. There are really no words to accurately and sufficiently praise her many qualities or to describe her devotion to Bubby and to me. I know Hashem will reward her for her never-failing kindness. When families face difficult situations, they are tested, and that's when you really see who steps up to the plate. That pun was intended. And in regard to Kibbud of Aim, to myself and Ernie, or to my parents, my mother-in-law, my children have always had an innate sense of responsibility, decency, and menschlichkeit, and I'm very proud of that. And I thank all of you for caring for your Bubby in that manner. Last but not least, my thanks to Arnie. There are those who see me as the one who nourished my mother, but it is not so. It is Arnie who treated her with never-ending love and respect. His care went beyond the little things like I did, like managing her pills or driving her to the doctor. He took care of her soul, her neshama, and he made her feel important, and he never entered or left the room without giving her a big hello or goodbye. He did some personal things that many sons would not do, and he never complained about it. And he did this for my dad as well. His kindness towards her and his helpfulness to me set a strong example to our children, and I know they learned a great deal about how to care for parents from him. And on this chus, he should live bis 120. Mom, I ask you for mechila on behalf of all of us, if we ever did anything to upset you. May you be a good debater for all of us.
I'd like to call up three of her granddaughters who had such a close relationship with their Bubby. First, Shani.
As the oldest grandchild, I thought I should say a few words. Bubby, Bubs, but she was Mom to me, was a wonderful grandmother for all the things you might expect. Her baking was second to none. Honey cake, kippelas, sponge cakes, cheese delkels are the things I will remember most. Her stash of gum and candy in the cabinet in the den, her Shabbos lunches, they are the memories and smells of my youth. I was on the plane coming here this morning, sitting next to a religious young woman who turned out to be the wife of a rabbi. Her first and subsequent only question to me, after I explained I was flying to Cleveland for the funeral of my grandmother, a survivor, was, did she talk about the war? In which case I started crying uncontrollably. It was the first time I cried since Eliza called me yesterday and told me that Mom had passed away. And once I was crying uncontrollably, it was really the only question and the end of our conversation. I thought about how growing up, we learned as children not to ask about the tattoo on Mom's arm. We thought of Mom as a strong and capable woman for all the things she did to take care of everyone, not the least of which was feed a small army for the holidays and many Shabbases. After losing her oldest child, my father, both of my grandparents managed to continue to live, albeit with an additional hole in their hearts. That hole filled with the loss of yet another loved one. Not until I started dating my husband, who's an all-around inquisitive person, who had not learned this don't ask behavior that we learned as children, did I find out detailed information about the life of that our grandparents led before coming to Cleveland in 1949. As a parent myself now, I don't know where they found the strength to go on, having already suffered such immense losses during the war. But I know that Mom, like so many survivors, possessed a strength of character and will to survive that is immeasurable and difficult to compare to those who did not experience those horrible times. In relative recent years, we tried to learn from our grandmother recipes and stories so that her story, our family's story, would not be lost. My Aunt Sally has documented every bit that she can. She's taken down recipes, though as Aunt Sally said, would complain about the food items that didn't come out the same as Mom's. My sister Dana, Dossie, Shayna, and especially Eliza have learned the recipes for many of the baked items that Mom made, and Mom was so very proud of that. I learned the recipe for the sponge cake, and it's a Pesach recipe, but one that Mom seemed often to have in her home for just an occasion when we would stop over. After initial fails, I would text pictures of my success each Pesach, and I know that that made Mom proud. Somehow, through her very thick glasses, she could see the cake on that small cell phone picture. And I know she could see it because after I sent her my first chocolate and yellow sponge cake, she commented, "Nu, you only made one chocolate layer? Not two?" So I learned. Ironically, ahead of this Thanksgiving holiday, my youngest daughter needed to bring into her classroom tomorrow something that was representative of our family. And a sponge cake was what my daughter wanted to bring in for her feast. So yesterday evening around 5 o'clock, I was making Mom's sponge cake. I don't do this unless it's Pesach. But that's precisely what I was doing yesterday evening, just before dinner. My 10-year-old daughter, Ivy, prepared all the ingredients for the cake. As I was mishing through the cake yesterday, as I was shown to do, I was thinking, even more appropriately, I was feeling how this was the love and the legacy of my family story flowing through me, being shared with my youngest daughter. Eliza said to me, it was as if Mom waited for her and Aunt Sally to get home from work before she left yesterday. We each have our own connection to Mom. But for me, I'm going to think that my successful sponge cake was the comfort that let her go to join Papa, her sister, and my dad.
Like to call up Dossie?
So much of my childhood took place in my Bubby and Zadie's home. My Bubby hosted many simchas for people, kiddushim, and guests from out of town all the time. She made people feel comfortable. Her home was a warm place where everyone felt welcome. We moved into Bubby's house for Pesach every year when I was a kid. She hosted a huge Seder and took care of every detail. Many women, including me, find this holiday overwhelming, but Bubby never complained. In fact, she said that Pesach was her favorite holiday. It was the tastes of her childhood, and she was surrounded by all of her grandchildren. What could be better, she would say. My Bubby loved Thanksgiving. She deeply appreciated the freedom that she had in this country to live her life as a religious Jew. She followed politics and baseball. Clearly that made an impression on us. And she voted in every election as a proud American. I often went to shul with my father on Shabbos mornings and would decide on the spot to go home with my Zadie for lunch. I would walk into the door and Bubby would say, "What a surprise," in her strong accent. Yet there was always a place setting for me and just enough food for one extra person. She was always prepared for a grandchild to show up at any time and always wanted us to feel like we were welcomed. Bubby had this incredible ability to make each of us feel like we were her favorite grandchild. She would always have something special for us when we came over or made our favorite foods. For Todd, it was the noodles and breadcrumbs. For Brittany, it was blintzes. And for Eliza, it was probably the Reese's peanut butter cups that Bubby hid in the bottom drawer of the fridge that she thought that nobody else knew about. Bubby did special things for each of us. When we were sick and home from school, Bubby was the one who took care of us. My sister Shayna remembered today that once a week she had Bubby Day after school. Zadie would pick her up and she would spend the afternoon with Bubby baking and having treats. How lucky Shayna is that Bubby got to meet and hold her brand new baby just 3 weeks ago. She did say each one was the prettiest. I was once at my grandparents' house on a Sunday afternoon when one of my Pollock cousins knocked on the door selling chocolate bars for a school fundraiser. The Pollock boys were always selling things. It's true, my Bubby bought 2 chocolate bars. She handed one to me and gave the other one back to my cousin. She told him to save it for when he was done with all of his sales as a reward for his hard work. When we came back into the house, my Zadie said, "Malchi, I told you I bought 4 chocolate bars from him in shul this morning already. Why did you buy more?" She responded by saying, no child should ever leave our house empty-handed. As grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, we were raised to appreciate what we had and not take them for granted. As I reflect on all of these memories now, I think that Bubby really appreciated it even more than we did. There was always pain in her heart that her children never knew her parents. And she did not take her role as a Bubby for granted. When I was engaged, I had an opportunity to have a private conversation with my Zadie. And in that conversation, I asked him why he chose her. What was it about Bubby that made him want to marry her and spend the rest of his life with her? His initial response, in classic Zadie fashion, was that this girl could cook and this girl could bake, but Bubby could do both. After I chuckled, and I know he meant that, after I chuckled, Zadie became quite serious, and he told me that he wanted Bubby because she was strong. She was geschickt. She was good at everything she touched or set her mind to. She was determined in nature, and that was what he wanted. He then proceeded to tell me the following story. Although they were not officially engaged, they had promised themselves to each other before Zadie went to the army. They planned to marry when he would return, but God had other plans. Soon after Zadie left, Bubby was sent first to the ghetto and then to Auschwitz with her siblings, father, and grandmother. Zadie ended up in labor camp, and when liberation finally came after a year of terrible suffering, Zadie came back to Sapinka first.
It was a whole year before Bubby was able to return. Zadie heard that Bubby had survived, but he had no idea where she was or what the state of her health was, only that she was alive. He knew she would return to find him, and so he stayed in Sapinka and went to the train almost daily to wait for her. Finally, one day, she came off the train, and he immediately asked her to marry him. About a decade later from this conversation, I was interviewing Bubby for a college paper, and I had the opportunity to hear her version of this story, which is a little different. My Zadie was in fact waiting for her when she got off the train, but she was bald and wearing men's army boots. She described herself as ugly and unrecognizable. The first thing that Zadie said to her was, "Malchi, let's get married." And she looked at him and said, "Simcha, die bist meshuga." You must be crazy. And I'm sure that's exactly how she said it. She could not believe that he was standing there, and she could not believe that he still wanted her. People who knew my grandparents might have thought that Zadie was the fiery one, the strong-minded one. But the truth is, Zadie was the softy, and Bubby was the rock. They were so well paired. He put on a strong front, but he knew how lucky he was. He described her as the shensta, the besta, the most beautiful, and the finest person that he knew. And he was right. When I was 10 years old, my Bubby suffered what was probably the worst tragedy of her life. She lost a child, my Uncle Nathan. Many of my childhood memories of Bubby are defined by this very life-changing event. I have my memories of Bubby before Nathan died, and the memories of Bubby after Uncle Nathan died. Part of her died with him, and she was so heartbroken. And I remember it so clearly, even though I was only 10 years old. I find so much comfort in knowing that after so many years, they're finally together again. Bubby exuded class and grace, and above all else, she embodied strong faith and belief in God. Despite all the suffering and challenges that she faced in her life, she remained faithful and did not lose sight of all that was still good. She has set a sterling example of what a Jewish woman should be, and I have not taken for granted that I have had her not only in my life, but also as a strong presence in my daughters' lives as well. Bubby was so intertwined into our lives. How many people take off of work for a friend or coworker's grandmother? Everyone knew our Bubby. Everyone knew that she was a permanent fixture in our lives. My friends would visit her regularly. Even my children brought their friends to visit her. I feel so lucky that my children are just devastated by this loss. My children grew up with a great grandmother who was in their lives every single day. We are just so lucky. I just need to take 1 minute to acknowledge my sister, Eliza. Those of you who know Eliza know that she is very giving by nature, and she does so quietly without making a big fuss. Eliza really went above and beyond what was asked of her these last few years. She not only helped with Bubby's care, but she cared for Mommy. She made sure Mom had everything she needed to be able to care for her mother the way she wanted to. Eliza, Bubby loved you so much. You might actually have been her real favorite. I won't say that again, so enjoy that. Nothing you did went unnoticed by any of us or by Bubby. As children, we learn about Matan Torah, the day that the Jewish nation received the Torah from Hashem on Mount Sinai. We learn that every neshama, every Jewish soul, was there to receive the commandments. I often think of this when I think of my parents, because I can picture them standing at the bottom of the mountain, receiving the mitzvah of kibbud v'aim, honoring your father and mother. That was a funny slip, mother. On a silver platter. My parents exemplify the definition of this mitzvah. When my parents made the decision a little over 5 years ago to move in order to care for Bubby,
I was really skeptical. Bubby was so used to living on her own at that point, and I just couldn't see how it was going to work. When I voiced my concern to my mother, she responded with, "We will adjust." Not Bubby will adjust, we will adjust. They would change any detail of their lives in order to make Bubby comfortable, and they continued to do that for almost 6 years. Any man living in a house of women, including his mother-in-law, might find reasons to complain. But in all of my life, truly in all of my life, I have never once heard my father crack a mother-in-law joke. He showed Bubby the same level of kavod, of honor, that he showed his own parents. Everyone can learn from your actions, Tati. My mother always said that she wanted to be the one to care for her mother. She was determined to make that work. She accepted each stage of Bubby's health, both physical and emotional, and no stage was easy. She accepted help when she needed to. She leaned on her family and her friends and the wonderful caring staff of JFSA, to whom we will forever be grateful. But ultimately, Mommy cared for Bubby the way she wanted to. We all followed her lead. Every aspect of her care was done with dignity, respect, with warmth, and with love. We watched her every day in awe. My children watched you in awe. People would sometimes comment that my mother must be earning many zechusim, many merits, for caring for Bubby in this way. While that is surely true, these comments would often bother her. This commitment wasn't about racking up zechusim. It was about doing what you gotta do, which is a mantra my mother truly lives by. She saw this as her responsibility, and boy, did she step up to the plate. Mommy, I know that Hashem will pay you for this kindness, because I know that Bubby will make sure that he does. I have never been prouder to be your daughter, and I know that I speak for my siblings and for Shaya when I say, thank you for teaching us what it means to have real kibbud of aim, and for allowing us to be a part of your mitzvah. To my Bubby, on behalf of Shaya and I, we would really like to ask you for mechila, for forgiveness if there is anything we ever did to upset you or hurt you in any way. If we ever did not give you enough or proper kavod, please, please forgive us. But most of all, I want to say thank you. Thank you, Bubby, for being my Bubby. May you be a Melitz Yosher, an advocate to Hashem on behalf of our entire family.
Finally, I'd like to ask Eliza to come up.
I am typically not the family public speaker, and it is hard to follow Shani, Dasi, and of course my parents. And I fear I'm going to be repetitive, so please bear with me. I want to start by saying thank you to make sure that I do not forget. First to my sisters and brothers who have helped care for Bubby, and together made sure Bubby was a top priority for all of us. I do find it interesting that as adults, we still all try to be her favorite. And there were witnesses, so. Dr. Klarfeld, you are much more than a family physician, and I truly don't think Bubby could have had a better doctor all these years. To all of our friends, your visits and messages made a world of a difference, and she was known to all of you as Bubs. Shirley, Grace, and Unique, Molly's angels. You took care of Bubby as you would have your own grandmother, and your kindness will never, ever be forgotten. You have become family to us all. You made sure to do so respectfully and with dignity, even in the most recent hardest days. And I want you to know that by taking care of Bubby, you were taking care of Mom as well. Tati, to say you were a true son is an understatement. There was nothing you wouldn't do for Bubby. Both you and Mommy have taught us what it is to give kavod, honor, to a parent. Mommy, I know you think that you didn't do more than any other daughter would or should do, but you have, and you made sure Bubby was the queen until the very end. As most of you know, the last bit of Bubby's life was the most difficult and achingly painful, but perhaps not as much of some of the other events of her life. Surviving Auschwitz, where she lost most of her family, and later in life losing her son, husband, and sister. But today, what is most important is remembering the full life that she lived. And I really want you to know the woman Bubby was to me, my siblings and cousins. The Bubby who would stay with me when I was sick, bringing me a cup of tea with exactly 1 ice cube and a straw. The Bubby who would cuddle with us in bed, telling us the Babitza story, which I learned as an adult is really not a child's bedtime story. When I was a kid, Bubby always had a bowl of flour sitting on the kitchen counter over the microwave at all times. And I'm a little OCD. I would sneak into the kitchen when I thought she wasn't there, which is silly because she was always there, as it was the control center for her. I would attempt to flatten the flour perfectly with the back of a spoon. I was always caught and swiftly instructed not to do so. A few years later, as a teenager, I learned that it was the perfect measurement for a sponge cake. Ready to go should someone need it. That was Bubby, the perfect balabusta who spent her life caring for others. From Bubby, I learned most, if not all, of my skills in the kitchen. She took the time to teach me her traditional recipes from the Heim: kreplach, knishes, hamantaschen, stuffed cabbage, blintzes, which Mom and I just made this past Saturday night. You name it. And she will ever be in my ear saying, "You just gotta use common sense." In the last few years, Shayna and I were given the greatest honor to help take care of Bubby, something she did for her Babalaya in Sapinka. I will thank God every day of my life for that special, unique opportunity. And while I did my best to do so in the most respectful way, there were plenty of times that I did not do something as quickly as I could have or with the wrong attitude. And for that, I am forever sorry and hope, Bubby, you can find it right to forgive me. In the last 5.5 years living with Bubby, I was privy to more stories about her life than ever before. About her childhood in Sapinka, details about the journey she and her sisters took after liberation, and her early days with Zadie. One of my favorites is when they were in Prague with baby Nathan, making their way out of Europe. Zadie came back to the small room they all shared and said he wanted to go to Israel. To which Bubby replied, "Simcha, you can go to Israel if you want, but I'm going to America with Nathan." There are a lot of things that I will not get to share with you, Bubby, at least not in a tangible way. But I know that you are finally with Zadie, Uncle Nathan, your mama and tata, and all of your dear family that you've been asking for, and that all of you are here with me and all of us always.
I'd like everyone to please rise. We'll say the Kamali Memorial Prayer. I'd like to call up a very close family member, family friend, Moshe Lovinger, to lead us in the Kamali.
This is for a wonderful lady whose warmth kindness, generosity, and strength of character emanated from her and touched all of us who knew her. Ele molei rachamim shochein bamromim hametzei menucha nechana al kanefei ashechino b'malos kedoshim utehorim kezoar roki amazhirim ese nishmas malka basanoson shalachol le'olamo bavur she'anachnu mispalelim b'yad askoras nishmo vaso began Eden tehem menuchaso lochein bal rachamim yastireo b'seiser kenofov le'olamim v'yitzror b'yitzror achayim es nishmoso Adonai hu nachalo voso v'sonuach b'sholom b'sholom al mishkovo v'nomar omein.
You may be seated. The interment will take place at Zion Memorial Park immediately following the service. Shiva will take place for Levine residents, 2543 Lafayette Drive, University Heights. Anyone who would like to make donations should do so to Beaker Cholim. Thank you.